Section 107 of the Fair Use Act of 1976 provides protection to use copyrighted material for research, analysis, education, and commentary purposes. We here at Loose Moose Productions reserve that right. Now, on with the show. Here's Joe B and the Triple B. Hey, Aunt Udine, how's things in Texas?
Everything is going to hell down here in Texas.
Hands on Triple B and Joe B. Joe B and the Triple B, baby. Triple B and Joe B. Rock on, get Joe Morelli. Triple B and Joe B. Joe B and Triple B, baby. Triple B and Joe B. Rock on, get Joe Morelli. We're coming in. I want to seek in the truth. About JFK. Here's the long-going podcast crew. And here we go.
And here we go. Muted. Not me this time.
You should have just mouthed the words for me, you know, like help a brother out.
I didn't want to step on your toes again.
Hey, it's all good. What's up, everybody? Take two. Welcome to the show. This is episode 291 of the Lone Gunman podcast. And tonight we're going to be talking about the Clinton witnesses. And these are the folks that Garrison really hedged his bets on when it came to the Clay Shaw trial. Not necessarily Perry Russo. When we're going to get into what they saw and what they said tonight, and we're also going to be looking at the closing arguments of the Shaw trial, of which there are three. Not just one, Joe, not just two. Three closing arguments from three different prosecutors from the district attorney's office. So it wasn't quite like the movie, you know, where Garrison just did it all. He actually did very little in the Shaw trial, if you go back and check out the transcripts. But anyway, welcome to the show. I know we pushed it back a little bit tonight for our co-host. Not my fault, Ev. Joe Barbecue Borelli. Welcome, my friend.
Oh, thank you, sir. Yes, I had to go to a barbecue with my girlfriend this evening, but I took different cars to, it was like 5 to 8, and I was like, I got to leave at like 7:15 latest. And, you know, the things we do for love. And speaking of, I'm also missing the Ranger game, which is starting in about 5 minutes, because where would I rather be than with all our beautiful listeners and you, sir, the big bad Bob.
Yes, and it wouldn't be a show if we didn't have our group of faithfuls here with us. What's up, Moose? Big Mike is in the house. He missed last week, but he is here today. Big Trey representing. I loved his comments. What's up, Ev? Big Claude, Aunt Udine, south to west in the house. Little tiny dancer. Hello. Let's see, Ev. Colleen, the Rocket Queen, is in the house. And Sally is here. Hello, Sally. Bungled, made it in by the skin of his teeth. Greg is here. What's up, Greg? Let's see. Jack is here. So welcome, all you guys. That's a long list. My God.
Hey, we love each and every one of them.
We do. So before we get started with the meat of the show here, I wanted to start off with something when Joe stepped on my toes last show, when I was talking about David Ferry coming to Oswald's apartment in New Orleans the night of the assassination. And what was he looking for, his library card or a picture?
I believe it was the library card that G. Ray Gill had informed him.
Yeah, so in the Shaw trial, they called Mrs. Jessie Jane Garner, no relation to D.A. Geo, Although it would be amazing if like it was his mom or something. But unfortunately, allegedly, they're not related. Allegedly. Although I do know that DAGO had ties in New Orleans, and I think he was even born there. I don't know if y'all remember that whole, what was it, Dago manuscript that was found in the antique store in New Orleans. But
Was
so
that
this
the one
is
you
this
read
is,
the
yeah,
first time with the voice? Okay.
yeah. Well, I don't know that. No, that was something totally different.
Oh, it wasn't the debut of the Dago? Oh.
No. So I'm going to read y'all a little short excerpt from this, just to give you an idea of how ridiculous this all went down at the Clay Shaw trial. So, question. I would like to have Ferry's picture, please, Mrs. Garner. I show you a photograph which has been marked for identification state number 3, being a photograph of the late David Ferry. And I ask you whether you have ever seen that man in your life, to your knowledge. Yes, I did. You did? Yes. Where'd you see him? In my house. In your house? Yes. When was that? Well, it was either the same day that happened that President Kennedy got killed or the following day. He came in, he rang the bell and opened the door, and there was some Mr. Alcock. I object to anything said, Your Honor. The court. It is objectionable, of course. Mr. Diamond, you may not say what anybody said to you, but I wish that you would tell the circumstances under which you saw this man. Well, I could say about him coming home. Yes, you could say about that. I don't know if it was the same night or the following night. As soon as it happened, there was so many coming in and out. I opened the door because I thought he was a Secret Service man or something. I don't know. So as I walked in, he says to me, Objection, Your Honor. You can't say what he said. I can't say what he said? No. Was he with anyone or by himself? He was alone. And how long did he stay there? A few minutes. And when I found out he was not somebody important, I just asked him to get the hell out of my house. You asked him to get out? Yes. Is that the only... Well, what I'm trying to say, when I found out he was not an FBI man, I just asked him to leave. I see. Now, do you recall whether this evening of the assassination or the evening after the assassination? I don't really remember, but I do think it was the same night. The same night or the following night? It was the evening, late after dark. So, they're trying... The implications of David Ferry showing up at Oswald's apartment in New Orleans the night of the assassination, looking for something that they won't let her say in court because it's hearsay. But if she was able to say, hey, David Ferry showed up at my house, he was asking about Oswald, maybe he left behind a library card or something, that would be pretty damning to David Ferry, even though David Ferry is already dead by now. But, I don't know. I just thought it was interesting that they wouldn't let her say in court why David Ferry showed up at her house on the night of the assassination. And that just tells you all you need to know, folks. Mm-hmm. But anyway, the Garrison case, the Shaw trial, it wasn't all about Perry Russo. In fact, when he started the trial, he called these certain group of witnesses. And these are the folks that managed to see and identify Clay Shaw, David Ferry, and Lee Harvey Oswald in the company of each other in the cities of Clinton and Jackson, Louisiana. Now, you would think, as did Garrison probably as well, that when Joe runs down through these witnesses of people that have no skin in the game, they have no dog in the fight, these people can say, yeah, I saw that guy with that guy and that guy, and positively identify them. Multiple witnesses, folks. Multiple witnesses. That, it would have cinched his case against Shaw. Now, it doesn't necessarily prove that Shaw was the mastermind of the assassination or anything like that, but it makes it very suspect when you have David Ferry showing up at Lee Harvey Oswald's apartment the night of the assassination. That's suspect. It's suspect when you have Lee Harvey Oswald hanging out with David Ferry and Clay Shaw in two cities that are 100 miles away from New Orleans. For what reason? I don't know, but it's still suspect. So, Joe, without further ado, let us dive in to the Clinton and Jackson witnesses. Sir.
Thank you, sir. And yeah, it's a fascinating topic of the assassination. And I was relatively, I was an expert on the subject, so I was looking into it a lot this week. And this is actually an HSCA witness list, and it's kind of in chronological order. So the first person who saw Lee Harvey Oswald was named Edwin McGehee, and he was a barber in Jackson, Louisiana. And Oswald came in to get a haircut. He asked Edwin McGehee if he knew any where he could find work, and McGehee referred him to the East Louisiana State Hospital, and specifically to the next person on the list named Reeves Morgan. And this was the person who Oswald went to his house. He was a state representative for the East Feliciana Parish. And Lee Harvey Oswald spoke to him about a job at the hospital. He was a security guard there. And he was also backed up by his daughter, Mary Morgan, who was a teenager then, who didn't say she saw Oswald, but said she saw a black Cadillac, which will be very relevant as we get into the next few witnesses. So that was the first day. The next day, Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly showed up at Clinton, Louisiana, the voting registration line. And the next person to witness him was the town marshal, which was kind of like a police officer back then. His name was John B. Manchester. And he was the one who saw Clay Shaw behind the wheel of that said black Cadillac. And also Lee Harvey Oswald in front of the voter registration office in the registration line. And the next person in the chronological events is the registrar of voters for Clinton, Louisiana, and his name was Henry Earl Palmer. And Palmer also saw a black Cadillac outside the voter registration office during the black voter registration drive. And he saw the next witness we'll talk about, Corey Collins of CORE, which was the Congress of Racial Equity. Standing near, he saw Corey Collins, this is Mr. Palmer, near the Cadillac, and he showed Mr. Palmer his Navy ID card, which read Lee H. Oswald. Next, Corey Collins in the black, what he saw was saw Lee Harvey Oswald, and all these witnesses were shown different pictures, and they picked out Oswald, although granted it was 3 or 4 years later when some of the investigation started, so that picture might have stood out to them more than others. But he also saw David Ferry in a black Cadillac. A couple of the witnesses noticed his crazy eyebrows. And The next is William Dunn Sr., who was a member of CORE as well from Clinton, Louisiana, and saw a black Cadillac in front of the voter registration office. Talked with Corey Collins, the person I talked about just before, and he also identified Shaw behind the wheel of the black Cadillac and identified Lee Harvey Oswald standing in line at the registrar's office. So after there are multiple people who said that Lee Harvey Oswald was standing out in the voter line for hours, and that means like 10:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. and after that. So that's more than 5 hours, and everyone said the Cadillac was parked on the side the whole time. And that's very interesting because that's a long time to wait, especially because when Lee Harvey Oswald got up to Mr. Palmer and on the in the voter registration line, first of all, he signed his name, but the entry was lost, unfortunately. And when Oswald was told that he needed to be a registered voter and you needed to live here to be a registered voter, and the constituents will get jobs before you because they're, locally based. He said, okay, thank you, and got in the car and left. So that's a long time to be sitting and standing in line. And by all accounts, it was over 90 degrees in late August, early September. And that's one of the other things that some of the lone nutters, because there's a big argument here, is are these witnesses credible? And was Lee Harvey Oswald actually there? And Gerald Posner wrote a whole thing about it, and it got a lot of rebuttals from people in the community, including
was it George D. Gino? James D. Eugenio.
Yes, that was it. And it's funny because he is obviously on the pro Clinton and Jackson witnesses side, and we'll get to whether Rob and I agree with that, because it's very complicated here. But if you notice, there are 9 people on this list here. This is the HSCA list, and as Rob was alluding to before, the first 5 witnesses in the Garrison trial were all from Jackson, Louisiana. That would be Edwin McGehee, Reeves Morgan, and Clinton, Louisiana, John Manchester, Henry O. Palmer, and Corey Collins. So the first day, he led off his opening arguments and his opening witnesses as the Clinton and Jackson witnesses, which is very interesting. It's something that I hadn't known, really, to be honest.
Ding, ding, ding. This is the comment of the hour, Joe.
Let's hear it.
LHO was the only white boy there. I would say he might have stood out. I would say so, too.
Yes. Well,
that's what makes him memorable. These, him doing this weird stuff, hanging out with these 2 old dudes and one weird-looking guy in a nice, sweet black Cadillac pulling up in town where nobody knows who the hell these people are. They're going to be memorable. And what did they do to Lee Harvey Oswald all throughout this scenario of the assassination? Make him memorable.
Yeah.
For whatever reason.
For
whether
sure.
it be the whole test driving a car thing or, whatever. Oh, I'm going to be coming into some money soon. Stuff like that. But, this is a perfect example of something done to make him memorable. Whether it be standing in line for hours to register to vote in a city he doesn't even live in, and he goes and tries to get a job at the state mental hospital there in Jackson, so he can vote. It's just weird. It's just weird. Weird all the way around.
Very, sir. And to Trey's comment, just stop sharing this for a second. There was actually another white guy on the line, according to many witnesses, and that is Mr.
Willie
Angus.
O'Keefe.
No, Angus Morgan.
Well, hello there,
And
Mr. Garrison. You're looking mighty fine in those threads, sir.
Mr. Garrison, we love voting wherever we want.
I'd vote
And
for you.
so
You got my vote, Mr. Garrison.
you got my vote any day of the week, Mr. Garrison. All right, hold on. Let me put this back here. So the other white guy alleged, and this was by two of the witnesses. If you see, let me actually present it.
I love this shit.
You love it, right?
Garrison did cut a fine figure in that suit.
You can visit
They
me
didn't call him the
anytime,
Jolly Green Giant for nothing, Joseph.
anytime he wants. So if you look at the bottom here, I added two people. Mary Morgan was Reeves's daughter, who I mentioned, who observed a black Cadillac when Lee visited her father's home, who was the state representative. And there was the other guy, Estes Morgan. I've seen it spelled with a U-S, Estes Morgan. There is no relation to Mary Morgan or Reeves Morgan, allegedly. And he was the only other white guy in line to vote. And I think it was Manchester and Palmer who both said that they saw him, but they weren't next to each other. There were two or three people separated from each other. So, and one person even said that they got out of the same car. So there are some conflicting witness reports, but that's going to happen pretty much anywhere when you're talking to people 4 years after the fact, right? I just made a little Google Maps screenshot here. This is Jackson on the top left. Can you see this, Rob?
Yes, I can.
Do you like my circling abilities here?
It's, amazing.
I use shapes instead of just my hand with a mouse, so it
I was
looks
going to say, they looked a little neater than normal.
Exactly.
Chicken scratch Burley.
Yes. And if you go from New Orleans up, north up 310 to 10, past Baton Rouge, I guess up 19 or 61 on the top left side of your street, you get first to Jackson, which, of course, the barber shop and also the hospital, the mental hospital was located.
I can just picture, I can picture it in my mind. Clay Shaw driving his black Cadillac with David Ferry and Lee Oswald in the back. Wind blowing through their hair, just giggling and laughing the whole way, the whole ride.
Yeah, I don't know if the black Cadillac was convertible, but you never know with Clay Shaw.
I'm pretty sure it was.
Oh, really? I didn't
For
see
some
that,
reason, it's in my mind like that, Joe. For some reason. I may have read that somewhere at some time. I don't know.
Well, I'm not going to double guess you, Mr. Garrison. So,
My mind is full of useless facts from 35 years.
hey, useless
Couldn't
to
tell
some,
you where I read it.
not to others. And Jackson and Clinton are about 12 miles from each other, and it's about a little over 100 miles from New Orleans up to those two towns. A little about 2 hours. It says 2 to 3 hours in some of the documents, but you can make it in 2 in Google Maps these days. Cars pretty much drove the same speed if you needed them to back then. So who knows? But I just wanted to give some of the viewers a mental image of how far Jackson and Clinton were away. And it's funny because if you keep going up 61 and you keep going kind of north, a little west, you get to my favorite town, Shreveport, Louisiana. And speaking of Shreveport, I was reading something from the Dealey Plaza Echo about the Clinton things, and it was going back and forth with back and forth on Posner's claims. And one of Posner's claims were that the witnesses found by Jim Garrison's investigators, or were found by Jim Garrison's investigators in 1967, and goes on to say that Garrison's team coached them to say what to say at the trial. This is false. John Rarick, a district judge, spoke to two of the witnesses, Ed McGehee and Reeves Morgan. Those would be the first two, shortly after the assassination. And a story about this was printed in a Shreveport newspaper called The Counselor.
Shreveport comes up again in the story, folks.
Yes. And The Counselor, Rob, I pulled up an article or two from this paper at some point in the last 6 months. And I saw it, and I searched for probably an hour for this article, and I could not find it. So if anyone out there wants to help, a little homework assignment, and it doesn't give a date, so it's really hard to find this, but it has to be 1965, early 1966, maybe late 64, but it's really hard to find, and it's hard to search the archives of old newspapers. But of course, on the right-hand side, the FBI's shocking response to those allegations, whereas in January 68, we learned that Reeves Morgan alleged that Lee Harvey Oswald was in Clinton and Jackson areas. We learned also that Morgan alleged he furnished this information to the FBI at some point after the assassination of President Kennedy. We made a thorough review of our files at the time and found no record that Morgan had ever furnished this information to us. At that time, we also made a thorough review of her files for any information that Lee Harvey Oswald had ever been in the Clinton or Jackson areas. Our files contained no information that Oswald had ever been in these areas. This information was furnished to the department in several communications in early 1968. So what are we to make of this?
Is this from Joan Mellon couldn't find it?
So that was from...
Is that who was talking about?
So that's a Dealey Plaza Echo article from...
but was it referring to Joan Mellon looking for this article and couldn't find it?
It didn't refer to Joan Mellon.
Because I think she interviewed a bunch of these people too.
She did. And, she was big on the Garrison and New Orleans scene. But also, one of our favorite researchers, and I won't even do the soundbite for this because we already did it, Mr. DiEugenio, I'll say it right, unlike Crystal Mark, on Kennedy's and King, also stated that, according to witness McGehee, not only was he aware of it from his own personal experience, but word of the incident was printed in the Counselor periodical before the Garrison probe started. So that's out there. It's from a couple different people. I was unable to find it, but if anyone can, I would be much, much grateful, because that would pretty much put it to rest, right? In terms of I don't know when the article would be dated, but...
And I don't even know how Garrison got put on to these folks out there, whether it was through the Rose Jeremy deal, and they just kind of, worked in reverse, or heard rumors of such things and investigated, and it's sketchy. But you would think, you got, like I said, you got what, 7 or 8 people here, Joe, that say, hey, this is what we saw. It's sus.
So,
like, what are they doing with this guy?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I actually was reading another article that says it was actually 14, but Garrison called 8 from Jackson and Clinton both.
Yeah, the other 6 were heroin addicts. No. And hooters.
But 8 witnesses, and when you think about like how much, because a lot of people like to discredit Garrison because he might have not been completely straight up or whatever with like a witness or two, might have intimidated one or two, got a statement, whatever. But does that mean that everything he does is completely, thrown away because of that? Assuming that's true, right?
Well, a lot of people do that to him.
Well, that's the thing. It's so easy to either like pick your spots, right? You could just discredit Garrison and completely, if it doesn't fit your narrative, just throw away anything he says, right? Or you could use it in bits and pieces, or you can completely believe him, right?
Well, you can have these 8 witnesses. You can put them in the courtroom, and it could go horribly wrong for you if you seriously screw up the questioning.
Especially
If you
on
don't
cross.
ask the right questions and you don't vet these people, and they can be easily torn apart by Diamond and his boys, then
Yeah, and I don't think Clay Shaw's lawyers were public defenders, right? Like they were highly paid lawyers. They will tear you the f up on cross examination if they need to, like if they can, right? Like, so you're not going to lead off the whole trial with 8 witnesses that are, say, 8 Perry Russos, right? It's a lot, and how much? No, I'm actually drinking from a Mets cup, we believe. Alpha 66. Alpha 66, any update from the game? He said he was going to update me on the chat here, so I didn't have to check my phone. What a guy.
they're losing. They're down 2-1, Joe.
Stop it. I don't have to score up. I know you.
Would I lie to you?
If they are, I'm going to be really mad at you. Let's put it that way. All right. So Garrison and one of his assistant DAs, Andrew Sciambra, actually had the balls to write to Hoover saying and requesting information relative to Lee Harvey Oswald's presence in the Jackson and Clinton, Louisiana area in the late summer of 63. On February 14th, 1968, we received a reply to this letter from Mr. Gene. Oh, this is the DA from the Eastern District of Louisiana. I believe that's Baton Rouge. And
Red Stick.
As noted in our letter to Mr. Litchfield, our office has information indicating that Lee Harvey Oswald was in the Jackson and Clinton, Louisiana area sometime in the late summer of 63. Therefore, would you please send us any information you have relative to Oswald's presence in that area at that time? And this is a great line here. If you have no information relative to Oswald's presence there at that time, we would appreciate a reply from you indicating this. That's funny. What do you think Hoover said when he saw that one? Oh, man.
Hey, go F yourself, buddy.
That's exactly what he said. And there was a response, but it was generic, and it wasn't from Hoover. He delegated it. But, I mean, they felt so strong about it, right? And that's why I shared this document. They felt so strong about it that they wrote a letter to Hoover about it. And I think they knew about the likely response, right, Earl?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think Hoover would have been. I think him and Clay Shaw and David Ferrie would have been fast friends, given their proclivities.
That's true.
But yeah, it's ridiculous to even ask at that point.
Yeah. And of course, Bannister had a relationship with him. I mean, Hoover demoted him, right? And what did he send him to North Dakota? What was one of those?
And I know that there was some belief that maybe the old dude that was driving the Cadillac was not Shaw, but was actually Guy Bannister. Either way, whether it was Guy Bannister or Clay Shaw, it's still suspect as hell. Given the fact that Lee Harvey Oswald was seen around Bannister's office, knew David Ferrie since he was a teenager, Ferrie was around Bannister's office, Ferrie was around Shaw's office, all these guys knew each other, so it doesn't really matter one way or the other who it was. It's just the company that they were all keeping together on that trip. It's just a mind f.
Yeah.
What are they trying to do? I don't know. And like I was telling Joe before the show, I don't think that Lee Harvey Oswald had any animosity toward integration or black people specifically. Given that, he grew up poor. He grew up poor in Louisiana and Texas. And, he was around these people all the time. You didn't hear any colored person in the school book depository that worked with him say anything bad about him. They talked to him. He talked to them. I mean, you had Charles Givens checking his orders, or Junior Jarman checking his orders. Putting him below Junior Jarman in
Eating
terms
in the
of rank.
domino room.
Yeah, eating in the domino room with those guys, talking to them. A lot of these people, they wouldn't even talk to black people back in the day. But and what would you say the Congress on Racial Equality is what this was trying to disrupt? Do you think?
Yes, core. Yes.
Yeah, where they're trying to register black voters.
Yep.
And what does the presence of one or two weird white guys have to do with anything other than trying to make a scene? But it wasn't like they were being disruptive. They were just standing in line waiting to register to vote. It wasn't like they were stomping up and down the sidewalk going, "Don't let the black people vote."
Right.
It's
right. Yeah. I mean, from all accounts, they were talking.
It's more like they were standing in equality, like in support of what they were trying to do. So I don't know. It's very weird stuff. And because like Joe said, well, you do the analogy of the Fair Play for Cuba committee for the people that you were explaining to me earlier.
Sure. So this is one of the things I was reading. And recall how quickly the Fair Play for Cuba committee folded after the JFK assassination in only a matter of weeks, once it had been linked, however superficially, with the alleged assassin of President Kennedy. And that brings up was the same type of fate intended for the Congress of Racial Equality in the South, aka CORE, was attaching a future well-known communist, right? Because he wasn't at the time. I mean, actually in late August, early September, which is when this event is supposed to have happened. This is after Lee Harvey Oswald gets arrested on August 9th. I know that day. 1963, and also after his TV and radio interview with Bernier and Ed Butler of Inca. So he was semi-known by then, but it's not going to be known by random people in random towns an hour north, 100 miles north, 2 hours, 100 miles north, right? So was this some type of, and that's, I think, one of the long suspected things that they were up to, was this trying to sink maybe the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, like they eventually did with the Fair Play for Cuba committee.
Like COINTELPRO, you're defining COINTELPRO to a T, Joe.
You're good. That's exactly what they said under.
That's what she said.
Reading. Yeah, and Bannister was former FBI, right? So
exactly.
Very possible. So I'm going to, because like usual, I am taking up a lot of time here. But so this is an FBI document I wanted to share. And this is interesting because it talks about how Jim Garrison on February 6th, 1969, opened his case against Clay Shaw with the testimony of 5 witnesses from Clinton and Jackson. Those are the 5 we told you opened the first day. In summary, the testimony of these men placed Clay Shaw. You got worse than 6 bobbers. Yes, I've been told that once or twice.
You got worse than 6 bobbers.
I know Doug will love that one. That is Uncle Junior of The Sopranos with an epic line. He has many epic lines. But essentially, what they did, the FBI summarizes the testimony, and I'm on the right side of the bottom right little square here, the testimony of Edwin McGee. They summarize it and then analyze it. And you got to wonder, okay, is this them protecting their image or just them like doing Oppo research on every witness ever? And let's see, McKee, he told the court he advised Oswald if he wanted a job at East Louisiana State Hospital in Clinton, he should see Reeves Morgan, like we mentioned. He stated that Oswald drove an old car and a woman was in the front seat. So that's one of those accounts where you actually have Oswald driving a car. One of those people that said that was Edwin McGee. And in preponderance of evidence developed in our investigation revealed Oswald did not drive an automobile. Okay. No information identifiable with him. And then talks about, what did I say? Oh, McGee. Reeves Morgan. Oh, no. There we go. This was the former state representative who Oswald went to his house in late August 63 or early September, told Oswald he would improve his chances to get a job if he registered to vote in Clinton, which he showed up the next day to do, and told Oswald he should take a civil service examination. I'm going to skip a lot of this because we're getting in on time. The third witness was John Manchester, and he was the town marshal of Clinton, Louisiana, which is pretty much like a cop. I actually came across a document from 1963 where he had arrested someone for disturbing the peace and some type of civil rights voting protest. And John Manchester was also accused of the FBI of being part of the KKK, Rob, and actually having his own little section of it in a way. And of course, with him was one of the next witnesses, Henry O. Palmer. And Manchester and Henry Palmer were the subjects of the same civil rights case investigated by the FBI in August 63. That's what I'm referring to. The case involved an arrest made by Manchester at the direction of Palmer of a civil rights worker who was trying to assist Negroes in registering to vote. Okay, so that's interesting, right? So this guy, Manchester and Palmer, are involved in some arrest for trying to essentially stop a civil rights worker who was trying to assist African Americans registering to vote. But from all accounts, that's exactly what he was doing on the day of the Clinton, Louisiana voting line drive, right? He was assisting and holding, like doing security, right? While Palmer was literally at the head of the table, the head of registrars, assisting Black people to vote. So, not much sense there, FBI. So, I mean, maybe they changed stances. Like a month later, it doesn't make sense to me, honestly, how they came up with. They labeled those guys, racists, extreme right, having all these views, but in the situation we know of that we're talking about today, they were helping African Americans to vote. So, all right, I'm gonna be quick here. The next is Henry Palmer, and that was Garrison's fourth witness, and he was the one that saw him over the course of, I think, 5-6 hours. And the next one was Corey Collins, who was part of that corps. It was actually, I think, the local leader of corps in Clinton. And this person also described Oswald, Ferry, and Shaw in Clinton. So, again, they're kind of playing the race card when you have people on both sides here. Corey Collins was African American, saying the same thing. So, one of the other things that is very interesting that I want to end on. So this is an interview with Bobby D.A on August 4th, 67. So essentially, when Oswald went to Clinton, Louisiana, he went there for that day, was told he couldn't register, left in the black Cadillac, and allegedly went back to Jackson, maybe on his way back south. I don't know. But Lieutenant Fruge and I, this is Andrew Sciambra, interviewed Bobby D.A at the hospital. They're talking about East Louisiana State, and they have a tape recording of the conversation. Interesting. These are some of the highlights. While looking through pictures of people, Miss D.A picked out a picture of Lee Harvey Oswald and said that she felt definite that she had seen him and talked to him at the hospital. She said she was working at the clinic as a receptionist, and she feels Oswald came and asked her for instructions of how to get to the personal office. She feels she told him where it was with no further conversation. Miss Deedon then looked at Lieutenant Fruge and said that she also remembers the time that Pruge came to the hospital to pick up Rose Cherami, Rob, around November 63. And she also said that she remembered that Fruge was with an older person. Fruge acknowledges this to be true. Fruge, whatever. So this cop, this Louisiana state trooper, was also involved with, I read, was the one that found Rose Cherami 2 days before the assassination after she left that mental institution. But this guy is running around with Garrison's DA interviewing people, which I think is interesting and kind of ironic. I don't know.
Well, I think Moo Andrew Sciambra was a former cop. I don't know if he was state police or if he was New Orleans PD. I can't remember. But they likely knew each other and were friendly.
Oh, that can make sense a lot. Sure.
Yeah.
And the last slide here, the last three people were William Dunn, who was also a member of CORE. He backs up Corey Collins, is whatever the name is.
Hughes.
Yeah, Corey Hughes. There we go. Statement. And Maxine Kemp was the other receptionist that Bobby D.A, who I just read her testimony to the Garrison investigators. Bobby then sent Oswald to Maxine Kemp, who later said that she recovered Oswald's application in September 64, but that it disappeared shortly thereafter.
Oh, imagine that.
So what are we to make of all this? I don't know if anyone is closer to...
Like I said, this was supposed to be Garrison's home run. That's why you start off with your strongest witnesses to make an impression on the jury. And for some reason, these witnesses didn't. And I think that's why he relied very heavily on Perry Russo to pull his ass out of a jam. And, there may have been things said, things done, who knows what the real truth is there.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rob, let me ask you,
Yes.
hypothetical. So say we know that was Clay Shaw with Ferry, with Oswald in Clinton and Jackson. Does that make him an accessory to conspiracy to murder the president, which I think Bungold asked what was the official charge? I think it was conspiracy to murder.
Well, if he in his mind is tying this to the Perry Russo story, then yes. Now, hypothetically, if Perry Russo never existed and you didn't have that testimony, does it change anything? Well, you still have these two guys who shouldn't be anywhere near Lee Harvey Oswald, but are. And that's what makes it weird. That's what makes it suspect. And when you can tie them, not just there in Jackson and Clinton to Lee Harvey Oswald, but also in New Orleans, even going back to Lee Harvey Oswald's teen years. And you have David Ferrie and Clay Shaw, who are arm's length tied to the CIA in some form or fashion. They have some kind of relationship with the CIA. They may not be officially CIA, but the truth came out about Clay Shaw in the 70s. That he was a contact agent because he was a traveling businessman. So he was feeding them information. And of course, anybody in that position, maybe you look at trading information as a form of currency at some point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To hedge your bets later, But again, you have Ferry, who's also at arm's length, tied to the CIA, doing these gun running and clandestine missions into Cuba, Bay of Pigs stuff, So them just being in the proximity of Lee Harvey Oswald at all, whether it's in Clinton, in Jackson, or in New Orleans, screams to me of moving around a pawn on a chessboard. Somebody's telling them to have Lee Harvey Oswald do this, have him do that, have him go here, have him say this. Hey, buddy, it's time to go back to Dallas. Hey, if you did this, it'll look this way. Do this, do that. That's what it seems to me, because everybody, and I say this a million times, everybody always looks to Dallas to try to solve the assassination. Well, you're never gonna. This whole thing was born in New Orleans, like it or not. Okay, this is where Lee Harvey Oswald was almost the entire year of 1963 up until 2 months before the assassination. So, like it or not, whatever was going on in New Orleans with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, with Carlos Bernier, with Guy Bannister and Jack Martin and David Ferrie and Clay Shaw, you can tie all these guys together in some form or fashion. It's suspect. And it screams to me of a setup of a patsy, which means that there was a plot to murder Kennedy at some point, whether it be in New Orleans or in Chicago or in Miami or in Dallas, wherever it may be. These guys were responsible for making Oswald look one way or another, or steering him to do this or that, or seemingly appear to be this kind of a person when in reality he's this kind of a person. Hey, create a Fair Play for Cuba Committee chapter in New Orleans, give yourself an alias, have fictitious members, get in a fight with these anti-Castro Cubans in the middle of the street, make yourself seem more important than what you are, go on a radio debate, go on a, live TV. Who knows what the real truth is here? But, yeah, it's all suspect, Joe, for sure.
Yes. I want to highlight something. First of all, thank you, Alpha 66. I guess Rangers are up 1-0. And PSV Odyssey said something really funny. Joe is a great show filler. Yes. I yap worse than 6 barbers. But I think that was good for the context. And one thing I want to say in terms, someone said, I saw a Judith Very Baker comment, and I want to mention this, Rob. I think Judith Very Baker inserted herself as that woman in that McGehee said he saw Oswald with. So, of course, she jumped onto this, and Reeves Morgan's daughter, I believe, said she saw a woman outside in the car, and she, of course, jumps all over that. Shocker. And, there's a lot of back and forth contention as to whether the barber actually said he saw a woman with her or said he saw a car outside and the car left. Once Oswald left, it's a whole mess that, you guys can look into yourself. And I just want to see if there's any other things here before I stop yapping and you get into it.
Here, Uncle Dave has a good comment. Let me pop this up. The case has to be worked from the bottom up and not the top down. And this comes from a former police investigator, a very highly respected one. So take that for what it's worth. LA Joe is the bottom. He's a power bottom, Dave. Power bottom.
Yeah, that's very true. Great comment by Dave.
All right, so let's get into some closing arguments that were given in the Clay Shaw trial. And the first one up was done by James Alcock, who conducted a good bit of the questioning during the Clay Shaw trial. So he starts off, Mrs. D.A, who you were talking about from the Jackson State Mental Hospital, right? Confirmed the fact that Lee Harvey Oswald did eventually go to the East Louisiana State Hospital and ask her for directions to the administration building. And the administration building is where the personnel office was, where a man would attempt to seek employment at East Louisiana State Hospital. Mrs. Kemp testified she saw Lee Harvey Oswald's application in the files of the East Louisiana State Hospital. And there is something curious about this. And it's another coincidence, perhaps. She said that the file card had Harvey Lee Oswald on it instead of Lee Harvey Oswald. Gentlemen, there is only one person in this courtroom during this trial who ever admitted to calling Lee Harvey Oswald Harvey Lee Oswald. And that was the defendant before the bar when he gave his interview the night after he was arrested. Now, what has the state shown by the presentation of these witnesses from Clinton? I think it has demonstrated, it did demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt. At that juncture, the defendant was a liar, totally unworthy of your belief, and that in fact he did know Lee Harvey Oswald, and that in fact he did know David Ferry. Gentlemen, after the evidence from Clinton, Louisiana, the state put on the stand certain police officers who had arrested Lee Harvey Oswald, certain evidence as to the distribution of Fair Play for Cuba committee leaflets. You saw these leaflets. Marina Oswald testified that she put the stamp on the leaflet, A.J. Heidel. You've seen the leaflets. The interesting one and the significant one, gentlemen, was June 16th of 1963. Officer Gaillot said that he asked Lee Harvey Oswald, who was passing the leaflets out, to leave the Dumaine Street wharf. But what's critical here, gentlemen, is the fact that he sees some leaflets and they were identical to the ones taken from him on Canal Street. The one identified by Marina Oswald on June 16, 1963, and they were significant for this very reason, because the latter part of June 63, a state witness by the name of Vernon Bundy saw the defendant and Lee Harvey Oswald on the lakefront in this city. And if you will recall, he said that he wrapped up his narcotics outfit in leaflets that said, "Free Cuba," or something of that nature. I showed him the leaflet taken from Lee Harvey Oswald earlier that same month and one of the leaflets taken from him earlier that same month, and he said it appeared to be the same. Now, let's consider the testimony of Vernon Bundy, gentlemen. I want to make one thing abundantly clear. I do not apologize for Vernon Bundy or any witness that the state of Louisiana put on during this case. You take your witness, gentlemen, as you find them. It would be fine if we had a lot of bank presidents come before you and tell you how they overheard the defendant conspire to kill the President of the United States, but you are not going to find too many bank presidents associating with Lee Harvey Oswald and David Ferry and those of his stripe. Vernon Bundy took that stand, gentlemen, and we elicited from him at the outset that he was on the methadone program, designed to help addicts rid themselves of the habit of drug addiction. This man told defense counsel and the state from the witness stand that he had been shooting narcotics for a long, long, long time. And he took his witness stand, gentlemen, and he said that he had gone to the lakefront of this city, and that when he was on the seawall preparing his narcotics for injection, a black car pulled up behind him. Now, gentlemen, perhaps it's difficult. I know it's difficult for me. And I know it must be difficult for you to put yourselves in the frame of mind of Vernon Bundy or any drug addict on the seawall. He is concerned with only one thing, and that is shooting the narcotics, protecting the narcotics, and not letting the police sneak up on him and arrest him. Yes.
Continue.
The moment the car pulled up, gentlemen, you can be assured, and you were assured by Vernon Bundy, that his attention was riveted on that automobile as it was on the occupants of that car who left the car and walked along the seawall, and his attention was riveted for a good reason, and he told you that reason. He did not want this man to run up on him all of a sudden before he could jettison or throw his narcotics out into Pontchartrain Lake, because without the evidence, the man cannot be charged with possession of narcotics. And he riveted his attention to that man. He saw another man walk from the other end of the seawall from the other direction. They met. And he, in this courtroom and under oath, positively identified the defendant, Clay Shaw, as the man that got out of the black Cadillac. Coincidentally, the defendant was seen in a black Cadillac in Clinton in late August, early September '63. He saw him get out of that black Cadillac, approach the other man, who he positively identified as Lee Harvey Oswald, and he appeared to give him a roll of money. That is, the defendant gave Oswald what appeared to be a roll of money, and when Oswald put this item, which appeared to be a roll of money, in his pocket, he dislodged some of those leaflets, and the same leaflets that he had been distributing from the Dumaine Street Wharf earlier that month, maybe a week or week and a half earlier before this incident. And let us recall, gentlemen, that Vernon Bundy was seated on top of the wall, or the top step, rather, of the sea wall. His position was down, and there is something that he noticed, something that frankly might have frightened him a little bit. As he said somewhat, it was the strange gait or apparent limp of this man whom he identified as the defendant before the bar. Vernon Bundy graphically demonstrated to this court and to this jury while he was on that witness stand when he made that defendant walk back to that door and then walk forward. Is there anyone in this courtroom or anyone on this jury that did not notice the particular gait of the defendant? The defendant himself on the witness stand admitted that he had the affliction in 1963 as a result of a dislodged disc in his back that he suffered in a gymnastics exhibition. This was but further corroboration of the testimony of Vernon Bundy in this case. Again, gentlemen, when the defendant makes the statement under oath as he did not know Lee Harvey Oswald, he is a proven liar and unworthy of your belief. That's Alcock, closing arguments. So he chose to focus strongly on the Clinton witnesses and the testimony of Vernon Bundy. Now we move to Alvin Oser's closing statement. Now, in discussing 399, that is the magic bullet, as to whether or not that particular pellet did the damage to the president and the governor, I direct your attention to the testimony of Dr. Fink, who testified in court and told the Warren Commission that in his opinion, it was impossible for Commission Exhibit 399 to do all the damage attributed to it. Going through his neck and doing the damage to the governor, because why, gentlemen? There were too many metal fragments in the wrist of the governor. You heard testimony about the weight of this particular bullet. You heard testimony from Agent Frazier of the FBI that the jacket of this particular bullet was intact, and that the jacket is a copper jacket bullet containing lead on the inside. And as I said, basically intact. He did say a part of the jacket was removed when he submitted it to spectrographic analysis. Also, we have testimony in this case from the witness stand that in the throat area of the track through the throat of the president, there was metallic substances. We also have, gentlemen, in regard to this very important point, we know as we set up with the pictures, according to the Zapruder film, that the president had reacted at frame 224. We know in the pictures and from the expert testimony that the governor is reacting at approximately frame 238. And of course, we know by merely viewing the film and viewing the photograph of frame 313 that the president was hit the final time at frame 313. Now, you might recall a lot of testimony and a lot of questions on my part from lateral angles about whether or not the experts during their reconstructions not only calculated the angles from the 6th floor down, or the horizontal angle, or the vertical angle rather, but what was the lateral angle, the right to left angle, which was not calculated by any of the experts during the reconstruction. Let's take, gentlemen, in regard to frame 224 for a moment. And this Agent Frazier couldn't see or understand what I was driving at, but I want to show it to you. If you take a line and you draw it through frame 224, demonstrating with green paper over red dots, my point was in asking Frazier what was the lateral angle right to left from here to here, measuring with string, this angle, gentlemen, that is created between this green line and this piece of string. Now, as an aside here, folks, what he is talking about is the angle from the 6th floor window to the back of President Kennedy sitting in the limousine. Did they calculate that angle, and was that angle followed through the body of the president and into the body of Governor Connolly? It was not, by the way. Gentlemen, if you recall the testimony of Dr. Nichols, who told you that the hypothetical question by Mr. Alford in describing the wounds of the throat area of the president, as stated by Dr. Fink, one of the pathologists at the autopsy, that the trajectory through and that there were no bones broken in the throat area of the president. Dr. Nichols told you in order for a projectile to pass through the area of the human body at this particular location and not hit bone, that the minimum angle would have to be right to left, that of 28 degrees. Now, referring to frame 224, let me take a protractor and place it in the area of 224 through the perpendicular line and view the angle of 28 degrees. As I read the protractor, the angle of 28 degrees from frame 224 places it here. That's the spot, not the 6th floor of the School Book Depository building, because you remember they didn't even attempt to ascertain what the lateral angle is or was. The spot on that protractor, on the basis of Dr. Nichols' testimony, it had to be at least 28 degrees. Otherwise, it wouldn't have gotten through the neck without breaking a bone. Puts the shot at 224, not from the School Book Depository 6th floor, but somewhere in this vicinity of the Texas School Book Depository building, which is not the 6th floor window. Which window? I don't know. But you recall Mrs. Carolyn Walters' testimony, who was standing in this vicinity here at the time of the parade was coming. She looked up to the Texas School Book Depository and saw two men in a window and one with a gun. Two men in a window, one with a gun. Now, considering the fact, gentlemen, that in speaking of the 18.3 frames per second and whether or not a single bullet could have done all the damage, we have shown to you that between the frames 224 and 238, there must be the passing of 3/4 of a second. We have shown you testimony of the expert that if Connolly was hit with the same bullet, it had to happen in 7/760th of a second. And furthermore, that according to the expert testimony, that bullet could not have possibly gone through the human body in a minimum angle other than 28 degrees. If they had calculated the lateral angle that I was talking about, but they didn't seem to understand what I meant, that is where the 28 degrees falls. Because if you recall, Dr. Fink, the pathologist of the autopsy, said that there were no broken bones in the president's throat. So, I believe, gentlemen, the state has proven to your satisfaction and beyond any reasonable doubt that not only could the gun that Frazier tested not have fired in the time span using the Zapruder film as the clock to get off 2 shots, likewise, the same bullet certainly could not have hit the President of the United States and Governor Connolly. And if that didn't happen, folks, what do we have now? Now we have 2 people and 2 guns. Now, let's turn for a moment to the headshot of the President. But before we do, touching upon one point as to whether or not the governor and the president could have been hit by the same bullet. In order for a bullet to go through the president's neck at 28 degrees, which is the minimum angle Possible if it didn't break any bones in order for the same bullet to hit the governor in the armpit. That bullet is traveling on the track of 28 degrees from this area here, which is not the 6th floor window on this particular corner of the school book depository. That in the opinion of Dr. Nichols, the governor, after he viewed the film and studied the photographs, would have had to have been at least 18 inches to the left of where he was sitting. Nowhere in any of these photographs, 224, 230, 238, is the governor 18 inches to his left, which would make it possible for the same bullet then to enter his particular back and do the damage that it did. Let's look at the third result, that of the wound in the president's head. I believe you will recall, gentlemen, from seeing the Zapruder film, the reaction of the president in that particular film of him going back and to the left as he sat in the car around frame 313 and thereafter. Now, Joe the juror, are you awake yet? Are you following what I'm saying, Joe the juror? Or are you fucking lost? I mean, I don't know what Alvin Oster was doing there, but I think he lost a lot of the jurors with his angle speak and 0.7 of a second of this and that and the other. They did a much better job in the movie JFK when Kevin Costner was up there going, just watch it. Back and to the left. Back and to the left. Back and to the left. You know?
Yeah.
Woo!
Yeah, it does get really, really complicated when you started getting into angles and the
right.
The
so
dip.
What's interesting to me is these final arguments, these closing arguments to the Clay Shaw trial focus on the Clinton witnesses, the Jackson witnesses, the ballistics, the testimony of one of the pathologists, the impossible angles of the magic bullet moving in midair over 18 inches and the back and to the left thing. I get it. I'm sure it was impressive, not as quite as impressive as the one in the movie, the scene. And it probably did lose some of the jurors. Their eyes probably glazed over at some point and were like, what the hell is this guy talking about? You know? Yeah, Sally's glazed over.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's why I wanted to read it to you so you get an understanding of why Jim Garrison lost this trial. You know, like I said before, it really depends a lot on how you present your case to the jury. And you can't just roll in there and not break it down like you're speaking to a 7-year-old child for people to start understanding this stuff. You can't be sitting there breaking out string and protractors and talking about angles and this, that, and the other. You know, you're going to lose the jury. And I think that's partly what happened. Which brings us to the closing arguments of Mr. Garrison, Joe.
All right, Mr. Garrison, why don't you go ahead with your closing arguments?
All right now. Do I understand, Mr. Garrison, that you wish to address the jury? Oh, yes. You may proceed, sir. May it please the court, gentlemen of the jury, that I'm not going to dignify Mr. Diamond's personal interferences about my staff, because I think you have seen them for some days, and I think you have seen me here, and I will leave it to your judgment whether or not we would take advantage of any human being in order to try and get gain of any sort. And I will address myself to the remaining issue of the case which have been posted by Mr. Diamond. Now, I know you are very tired and you have been very patient, and this final day has been a long day, so I will speak only a few minutes, and I will probably make one of the shortest closing arguments that has been made in this court, because I think most of the issues are clear to you, and I feel that you probably have an understanding of this case by now. But Mr. Diamond has posed in his last argument one final issue, which in a sense raises a question of what we do when the need for justice is confronted by power. So let me talk to you about whether there is a government fraud in this case. Now, a government is a great deal like a human being. It is not necessarily all good, and it is not necessarily all bad. We live in a good country, and I love it, and you do too. But we have nevertheless a government which is not perfect. And there have been indications since November 22nd, 1963, and that was not the last indication, that there is excessive power in some areas of our government, and that the people have not received all of the truth about some of the things that have happened, some of the assassinations that have occurred, and particularly with regard to the assassination of John Kennedy. Going back to when we were children, I think most of us, probably all of us here in the courtroom, felt that justice came into being automatically, that virtue was its own reward, and good would triumph over evil, that it occurred automatically. And later, when we found that it wasn't quite so, most of us felt that hopefully, that at least justice occurred frequently of its own accord. But now I think that almost all of us would have to agree that there is really no automatic machinery, not on this earth at least, which causes justice to happen automatically. Men have to make it occur. Women have to make it occur. Individual human beings have to make it occur. Otherwise, it doesn't come into existence at all. And this is not always easy. As a matter of fact, it is always hard. Because justice presents a threat to power. And in order to make justice come into being, you often have to fight power. Mr. Diamond raised the question, why don't we say it's a fraud and charge the government with fraud if this is the case? Well, then let me be explicit and make myself very clear on this point. The government's handling of this investigation of John Kennedy's murder was a fraud. Ever perpetrated, it was the greatest fraud in the history of our country. It was probably the greatest fraud ever perpetrated in the history of humankind. So that is where I stand on the point. But that doesn't mean we have to accept the continued existence of the kind of government which allows this to happen. We can do something about it. We are not forced to either leave this country or accept the authoritarianism that is developed, which tells us that in the year 2039 we can see the evidence finally about what happened to John Kennedy. The government does not consist only of secret police and domestic espionage operations and generals and admirals, and the government consists of the people. The government consists of people, and our government consists of juries. In cases of murder, whether the poorest individual or the most distinguished citizen in the land should be looked at openly in a court of law where jurors can pass on them and not hidden, not buried like the body of the victim beneath the concrete. No. For 75 years. Now, you men in recent weeks have heard witnesses that no one else in the world has heard. And you've seen what happened to your president, and I suggest to you that most of you know right now that in the area that at least a fraud has been perpetrated. That does not mean that our government is entirely black, and I want to emphasize that. It doesn't mean that the president is bad. It doesn't mean the Supreme Court is bad. It does mean that in recent years, through the development of excessive power, because of the Cold War, forces have developed in our government over which there is no control. And these forces have an authoritarian approach to justice, meaning they will let you know what justice is. Well, my reply to them is we already know what it is. It's the jury system. And in the issue which is posed by the government's conduct in concealing the evidence of the case, and the issue of humanity is posed to power, I have chosen humanity, and I will do it without any hesitation, and I hope every one of you will do the same. And I do that because I love my country, and I want to communicate to the government that we will not accept unexplained assassinations with the casual information that if we live 75 years longer, we may be given more data. In this particular case, our efforts look into it, and it was our duty when we found out that part of the assassination planning occurred in New Orleans, in my city. Massive power was brought to bear to prevent justice from ever coming into the courtroom as it has, I can assure you. The power to make authoritative pronouncements. The power to manipulate the news media by the release of false information. The power to interfere with an honest inquiry. The power to provide an endless variety of experts to testify in behalf of power was demonstrated in this case. The American people have yet to see this Zapruder film. Why? The American people deserve to see the Zapruder film, and if they did, our government, we have a problem in which too much emphasis is given to secrecy with regard to the assassination of a president, and not enough emphasis has been given to the question of justice, to the question of humanity. These dignified deceptions will not suffice. We have had enough of power without truth. We don't have to accept power without truth or leave the country. I don't accept that alternative. I don't intend to leave the country. I don't intend to accept power without truth. I intend to fight for the truth. And I suggest that not only is this not un-American, but it is the most American thing that we can do. Because if truth does not endure, then our country won't endure. Not in the way it was supposed to. In our country, the worst of all crimes is when the government murders truth. If it can murder truth, it can murder freedom. If it can murder freedom, it can murder your own sons if they should dare to fight for that freedom, and then announce that they were killed in an industrial accident or shot by the enemy, or God knows what. But in this case, finally, it has been possible to bring the truth about the assassination into a court of law for the first time ever, not before a commission composed of important and powerful, politically astute men, but before a jury of citizens of this wonderful country. Now, I suggest to you that yours is a hard duty, because in a sense, what you're passing on is equivalent to a murder case. It has the same essential characteristics, and the difficult thing about passing on a murder case is that the victim is out of your sight and buried a long way away, and all you can see is the defendant, and it is very difficult to identify with someone you can't see, and sometimes it's hard not to identify with some extent with the defendant and his problems. In that regard, every prosecutor who is at all humane is conscious of feeling sorry for the defendant in every case he prosecutes. But he is not free to forget the victim who he buries out of sight, and I suggest to you that if you do your duty, you are also not free to forget the victims who is buried out of sight. You know, Tennyson once said that authority forgets the dying king. This was never more true than in the murder of Kennedy. In a sense, you have seen in this courtroom indications of the interest of some part of the government power structure in keeping the truth down, in keeping the grave closed. We presented a number of eyewitnesses as well as expert witnesses as well as a Zapruder film to show that the fatal wound of the president came from the front. A plane landed from Washington and out steps Dr. Fink for the defense to counter the clear and apparent evidence of a shot from the front. I don't have to go into Dr. Fink's testimony in detail for you to see that it simply did not correspond with the facts. He admitted that he did not complete the autopsy because a general told him not to complete the autopsy. Now, in this conflict between power and justice, to put it that way, just where do you think Dr. Fink stands? A general who was not a pathologist told him not to complete the autopsy, so he didn't. This is the way I don't want my country to be. When our president's killed, he deserves the kind of autopsy that the ordinary citizen gets every day in the state of Louisiana or the state of Texas. We can't have government power suddenly interjecting itself and preventing the truth from coming to the people. But in this case, before the next morning, when the sun rose, power had moved into the situation and the truth was being concealed. And 5 years later, in this courtroom, it is continuing in the same way. We presented eyewitnesses who told you the shots were coming from the grassy knoll. A plane landed from Washington, and out came a ballistic expert, Frazier, for the defense. Oh, objection, Your Honor, Mr. Diamond says. Object to this, if the court please. Mr. Frazier was subpoenaed here as a state witness. Judge, he testified for the defense. He was called by the defense, Mr. Diamond. Yeah, but he was subpoenaed here from Washington as a state witness. Judge, it makes no difference who subpoenaed him. It is who put him on the stand. Mr. Diamond, we didn't have anything to do with his coming here on a plane from Washington. Back to Garrison. He got interrupted there a little bit. Now, the issue, I'm sure every one of you understands, is whether or not the government has created a fraud, and I call your attention to Mr. Frazier's explanation of the sound of shots coming from the front, which was heard by eyewitnesses, after eyewitnesses. His explanation is that Lee Oswald created a sonic boom in his firing that echoed around the plaza. Not only did Oswald break all of the world's records for marksmanship, but he broke the sound barrier as well. And I suggest to you that if any of you have a shot on a firing range, and most of you probably have in the service, you were shooting rifles in which the bullet traveled faster than the speed of sound. And I ask you to recall that if you ever heard a sonic boom, if you remember when you were on the firing line and they would say, ready on the left, ready on the right, ready on the firing line, commence firing. You heard the shots coming from the firing line to the left of you and to the right of you, and you had heard, and if you had heard, as a result of Frazier's fictional sonic booms, firing coming at you from the pits, you would have had a reaction and you would still remember it. It simply does not exist. It is part of the fraud, part of the government fraud, and the best way to make this country the kind of country it was supposed to be is to communicate that the government, that no matter how powerful it may be, we do not accept fraud, we do not accept false announcements, and we do not accept the concealment of evidence with regard to the murder of President Kennedy. Who's the most believable? A Richard Randolph Carr, seated here in his wheelchair and telling you what he saw and what he heard and how he was told to shut his mouth? Or Mr. Frazier with his sonic booms? Do we have to actually reject Mr. Newman and Mrs. Newman and Mr. Carr and Roger Craig and all the testimony of all these honest witnesses? Reject that and accept the fraudulent Warren Commission conclusions, or else leave the country if we don't like it? I suggest to you that there are other alternatives. All we have to, in this case, are the facts. Facts which show that the defendant participated in a conspiracy to kill the president and that the president was subsequently killed in an ambush. The reply of the defense has been the same as the earlier reply of the government, and the Warren Commission has been authority. The president's seal outside of the volume, each volume of the Warren Commission made necessary because there is nothing inside of these volumes. Men of high position and prestige sitting on a board and announcing the results to you and not telling you what the evidence is because it has to be hidden for 75 years. You heard in this courtroom in recent weeks, eyewitness after eyewitness, an eyewitness which was indifferent to power or influence, and that eyewitness was a Zapruder film. The lens of the camera is indifferent to power, and it tells you what happened, and that is the one reason 200 million Americans have not seen the Zapruder film. They should have seen it many times. They should know exactly what happened. They should know what you know now. They should have seen what you have seen. Why hasn't this come into being if there hasn't been government fraud? Of course there has. But I'm telling you that I think we can do something about it. I think there are still enough Americans left in this country to make it continue to be America. I think we can still fight authoritarianism. The government's insistence on secrecy, the government force used in counterattacks against an honest inquiry, and when we do that, we are not being un-American. We are being American because it isn't easy, and you are sticking your neck out in a rather prominent way, but it has to be done because the truth does not come into being automatically. Justice does not happen automatically. Individual men, like the members of my staff here, have to work and fight to make it happen. And individual men like you have to make justice come into being, because otherwise it doesn't happen. And what I'm trying to tell you is that there are forces in America today, unfortunately, which are not in favor of the truth coming out about John Kennedy's assassination. And as long as our government continues to be like that, as long as such forces can get away with these kind of actions, then this is no longer the country in which we were born. The murder of John Kennedy was probably the most terrible moment in the history of our country. Yet circumstances have placed you in the position where not only have you seen the hidden evidence, but you are actually going to have the opportunity to bring justice into the picture for the first time. Now you're sitting here in judgment of Clay Shaw, but you as men represent more than jurors in an ordinary case because of the victim in this case. You represent, in a sense, the hope of humanity against government power. You represent humanity, which yet may triumph over excessive government power. If you will cause it to be so in the course of doing your duty in this case, I suggest that you ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. What can you do for your country? You can cause justice to happen for the first time in this matter. You can help make our country better by showing that this is still a government of the people. And if you do that, as long as you live, nothing will ever be more important than that. Thank you. James Garrison. Yes. Not my finest performance, but he lied at the beginning of that, Joe. He lied. He said that was going to be the shortest closing argument ever seen in a courtroom. And by God, it was the longest. But we'll let it slide this time.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to give everybody a sense of what it was like to be in that courtroom during these closing arguments of the Clay Shaw trial, what these jurors had to actually hear being said, and get out of your head that picture that the damn JFK movie has stuck in there, because you think that's how it went down, right? But this is reality. And guess who wasn't mentioned not one time? Well, one time in all three closing arguments. Perry Russo. All three of these prosecutors chose to focus on different sections of the case against Clay Shaw.
Yeah.
You know,
and even the magic bullet, it's not even directly related to Clay Shaw, right?
Right. You know, they're just trying to paint a picture that we don't know the whole truth and that the government is hiding the truth. I mean, could you imagine sitting in this courtroom and watching the Zapruder film for the first time? I mean, that's got to make an impression on you. You know, it's like, holy crap. That looked like a shot from the front. You know what I mean? I mean, that's what I thought the first time I saw it. Like, holy crap. Holy crap.
Yeah. No, it's for sure. And we have some good comments. I'm going to, excessive power in the government. You don't say. And I think Tiny Dancer said 112th military intelligence officer was calling it TSBD. That was Powell, right?
Yes.
And you got to go, Rob, go. They will keep, Bungled had a great comment, they will keep Ruth on life support till 2050. I think he implies that if she's alive, like a lot of
she's going to be looking like the Crypt Keeper.
She might actually.
Joe, I forgot to show you.
Yeah.
My T-shirt.
Oh, stand up, sir.
You know who that is?
No.
Come on, man. Friend of the show. Fellow podcaster.
I can't see with the glasses. You got to give me a hint here.
Oh, maybe. Out of the blank.
Oh, is that Robbie?
It's our buddy Robbie. Yeah.
What's up?
I went and caught myself some merch.
He has a goatee?
Yeah. Sometimes.
That's
Sometimes he's baby smooth, but sometimes he's not.
that threw me off. But I love that. I enjoy
Yes.
Out of the Blank a lot. I
Yeah,
it's
shout
like
out to Robbie over
yes.
at Out of the Blank. He does a great job. He kills it. He's our buddy.
Thank you, Paul and Diana. Uh, bungled. You would have won the jury, BBB.
Yeah, I mean, screw Jim Garrison. Put Big Bad Bob in the courtroom.
Yeah, right. And even Sally was like, you started getting everyone in the chat feeling all patriotic.
See?
And Trey was standing in his living room, hand over heart. Respect. And yeah, we had
Although
that.
that I found another word I can't say, Joe.
Oh yeah,
Authoritarianism. Yeah, that was a rough one.
it's
It was in there 3 times on me.
You mean like this?
Fletcher Prouty, who is a complete maniac, by the way, he ends up being a Scientologist, UFOologist. He gets in bed with the Liberty Lobby.
Yes, the Liberty Lobby.
I still can't believe that one. And let's see what else. Is that a tank top, Bob? No, it is a T-shirt.
No, it is definitely not a tank top. Or you mean on Robbie? No, you can't see
No.
what Robbie's wearing.
I don't know exactly. Priority was an op, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, I don't disagree with that, and especially Rob, this will be
Vanilla Ice. Oh, Robbie will love that.
yeah, and that's a good that's good because you talked about controlled opposition on the last quick hits in terms of
Very young Lauren Hall.
Oh, is that? Oh
No, it's Robbie.
I was like, it
it's
looks.
DB Cooper.
It could be DB. It could be. I mean, DB I think had a little more of a bald head, or receding hairline, but I respect that. And people thought, and we had a couple of people think it was Lauren Hall, so it's not on me that I didn't get it right away. But that is some cool merch for sure, and. Yes.
You have to say that in the Vanilla Ice lingo.
I don't know if I had the Vanilla Ice accent down yet.
What is an emony? Hell if I know. Mike busting my balls. It's close to an enema, but opposite.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so one more thing I forgot to read, Rob, just going back to the Clinton thing, was that the HSCA in 1979, in their final report, the committee...
You got worse than 6 bobbers.
This is going to be a quick one. That they were inclined to believe that Oswald was in Clinton in the company of David Ferrie and, if not, Clay Shaw. And some of the people, or the person that wrote this article, which was kind of poo-pooing on the Clinton witnesses, was wondering if Robert Blakey needed a Carlos Marcello associate, aka Ferrie, as the mob connection to Oswald for his personal theory that the mafia killed Kennedy. And that's kind of interesting. It's some poo-pooing, and I think we do know that G. Robert Blakey was on the mafia angle, and that could have been a reason why they accepted it as truth, at least from the HSCA's findings, which of course did probably conclude that JFK was probably killed as a result of a conspiracy, but they're kind of sidestepping as usual. But they did say it was most likely that the Clinton and Jackson witnesses were truthful, and you have over a dozen of them, and 8 that testified in the Garrison grand jury. So it's a lot of effort to get all those people lying on the same page or somewhat on the same page, right?
Yep, it just didn't work out for old Jim. Just didn't work out. Can you imagine if they'd have found Clay Shaw guilty? What the hell would have happened?
I don't know. That's interesting. I've never thought about what would have happened. I mean, obviously he would have gone to jail, and
He would have appealed.
he probably would have got on appeal, I think. But that would have been a lot of drama for sure, and would have reverberated throughout.
I'll plead guilty to second-degree manslaughter.
And you got to wonder. I
But
just thought
nothing more.
And by the way, thank you so much, Trey, for the $5 super sticker. If I missed any before, I was yapping like 6 barbers, so I didn't hear it.
Joe, tweak my nipples, please.
Oh, sure, Mr. Gaston. Which nipple do you want to be tweaked?
I couldn't find a big enough version of the nipple tweak of this scene from JFK, but it's epic.
Mm-hmm. It's really good. But what I was going to end on is, so to your point, say Clay Shaw was found guilty. Does the HSCA happen? Almost, 7-ish, 8 years later? They're ruling about a decade later?
Probably.
Right, because it wasn't just Kennedy, right? And the HSCA.
Because if he would have actually won that case, he probably would have released the Zapruder film at that point, or got it to be released in its entirety to show the world what, consecrated Clay Shaw's fate. And it might have happened a lot earlier than it did.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Possible,
yes. Very interesting to ponder.
Capiche.
I didn't capiche. And yes, Tiny Dancer, to try to make up any ground I lost within the Italian American community. I'm doing a lot of things sometimes here, and the capiche came out of right field, and I was like, what is that? Hard word to look at, and you don't see that word very often. But Mr. Rob, close it out.
Yes, fine, folks. I know that if we're not already there yet, we will shortly be kicking on 1,600 subscribers. So thank you. It seems like we were just saying we were 1,500 like yesterday. But so if you haven't already and you checked the show out and you like what you saw, there's another 290 episodes. If you just go click on the playlist for the Lung Gummin podcast, there's a lot more episodes to go through. Make sure you're liking the episodes, you're subscribed to the channel, and you hit that little bell so you get notified when we go live or drop a new episode just for you. But for now, for this week, that's it. And there may possibly, Uncle Dave, be a quick hits coming this weekend too, so be on the lookout. Yeah, that's right, Joe. Peace.
Have a good weekend. Go Rangers.
And tweak your nipples.